welcome to a new episode of the Friday Salon. Today we're going to understand, we're going to decipher the thinking of one of the fathers of the financial world we live in today, the financial order, and I would even say the world order we live today.
You could definitely say that, yeah.
And when we say world order, Nikita, what do we mean? Do we mean it's such...
We don't mean
something like a conspiracy?
We don't mean guys in gowns in the back of like dark, smoky rooms. We mean just guys that like sat at a conference one day and set up some rules.
Thank you. So there's no conspiracy, there's
No,
nothing.
we don't really deal with that.
It's just the order in which the world operates, right?
Yes.
Exactly. So today we're going to discuss John Maynard Keynes. We're going to discuss the impact he's had on the world, on the financial world, and therefore, as a consequence, on the political, institutional, and geopolitical aspect of today's world. And therefore, we're going to discuss one of his major pieces, which is the economic consequences of peace.
Exactly. Or in fact, I'd say it's one of his lesser-known pieces, because he's famous otherwise for his works on unemployment and things like that, and government intervention. But this is a piece he wrote where he felt a deep satisfaction after witnessing what was happening at the Paris conference. And it reads to a great extent like a criticism of some of the leaders there. But before we get into these things, why don't we...
By the way, excuse me, you haven't noticed.
That's right.
Yes.
He's got a lovely piece of fabric tied around his collar.
Yes. So you always blame me, you never wear a tie, you never wear a tie. I'm not a tie guy. But now...
Well, you know, like iron sharpens iron.
Voila. Friends
Nikita sharpens Carl.
Thank you very much.
Carl sharpens Nikita.
So voila, I did an effort for you and for the audience today. It's my pleasure. It's your treasure anyways.
It looks good, man.
So you were saying, thank you very much.
I was saying, like, it's the first time you're wearing a tie, but hopefully not the last.
Honestly, you inspire me
for my
every day.
sake and for the audience's sake, too.
You inspire me every single day. What can I say? Please, you were saying, I'm sorry, I forgot you.
So why don't we look into a little bit, just a brief biography of who Mr. Maynard Keynes was to begin with.
I'd love to, honestly.
Yes, so he was always from a well-to-do background, you know.
A polymath.
He was a polymath. He was well known ever since the time of his youth for being very broad, or having a very broad set of tastes, you know. Whether it was arts or culture, languages, mathematics, music. Ultimately, though, he found his calling in economics.
So we need to understand, those big scholars, right, were polymath, meaning they were versed in many disciplines. They never separated philosophy from science, from math. For them, it was one. They didn't separate it, okay? They used to connect all those disciplines.
As a unity.
They teach today separately, which is a shame, because they're all interconnected together. And therefore, there are the elites of the elites, the crème de la crème, the cream of the cream, la crème de la crème, mesdames et messieurs, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, we're going to endeavor into John Maynard Keynes' thinking. Therefore, John Maynard Keynes was solicited, right? He used to work at the
Treasury.
The British Treasury, correct? He was the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Great Britain, and therefore his expertise, he was a technocrat, right? He was somebody who doesn't do petty politics, like, oh, he's bad, I'm good. None of that. We don't do that at the Salon. At the Salon, we go above and beyond good and evil. We don't talk about left, right, he's bad, he's good. No, we don't do that. We don't divide. We unite. We unite behind clear facts, simple facts, as it is, above ideologies, above good and evil. We're not here for party politics. We're here for meta-politics. Let's go. Anyways, so John Maynard Keynes was an expert in economics and many other aspects of things and other fields, therefore.
And so he brings all of his talents together when devising his economic theories. You can see it's rather philosophical and mathematical, because these represent one discipline, ultimately. And this is one of the pieces which kind of launched his career and his significance on the world stage, his economic consequences of the peace, which was his criticism of what was going down at the Paris conference.
Okay, listen, I'd like to make that video like, you know, we prepare videos, right, a bit. Like we read the books, you and I, each one of us, sometimes you read it in French, sometimes I read it in English or vice versa. But most of the times, like it's either if it's a piece that could be translated, one of us reads it in French, the other one in English. But anyways, like we don't have much preparation, I won't lie to you, other than the readings and a bit of discussion before shooting the video. First, we do the causes of the war.
The causes of the First World War. Yes.
Then we would do the Versailles Conference, the reasons he opposed the Versailles Conference. And then we could do the final piece.
Bretton Woods Agreement.
Bretton Woods and today's financial geopolitical structure. What do you say?
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah? Okay. So let's start with the causes of the First World War.
Let's do it. And you know, everybody knows about the assassination of the Archduke Franz
Yes,
Ferdinand.
it's simple. It's a simplification of the causes.
It's a
of
total
war.
simplification. What it was really was Europe had become just a box of dry tinder as a result of many economic and geopolitical forces at play. And the assassination of the Archduke was simply the spark which lit that whole gunpowder barrel on fire. A lot of the First World War and the reasons of its outbreak actually has its origins in the denouement of the Napoleonic Wars, I would say.
So,
and the defects of the concert of Europe.
Let's get a bit of context, right? There was the Pax Britannica. It was the peace imposed by Britain after the defeat of Napoleon.
Yes.
Napoleon, what did he do? He basically, we could say, instigate a certain unification of the Germanic states. The Germanic states, we're talking of nowadays Germany, right? Yes. They were so divided, like you have Palatinas,
Principalities, Bavaria, wherever, go.
Voilà, very divided, extremely divided. Napoleon united them, okay? We could say...
into the Confederation of the Rhine, yes.
Exactly, politically,
yes.
And plus then...
Institutionally.
Yes. Then you had Prussia, that took over Bavaria and the other Germanic states, okay? That's how we call them, Germanic states. And thanks to Napoleon's public political acumen, they were able, and through Prussian militarism, they were able to unite.
Yes.
Nice. And then they've asserted themselves, you correct me if I'm wrong, please, they've asserted themselves during the Franco-Prussian War.
Yes.
So now, we don't want to be boring. It's never boring with us, you know, we're the Friday Salon, but you need a bit of context if you want to understand today. Remember, history is a way for you to understand today. History is not, it's not just a story, right? You need to understand the context. You weren't born, and history was born with you, correct? What did Cicero used to say, by the way?
A man becomes an adult, or a boy becomes a man, when he learns that his life is longer than his own.
Exactly. So the more you understand history, the more you're an adult, right?
The longer your memory is, the more you mature. Like sometimes I go to a job interview and they're like, tell me about your job experience.
Yes.
And I'm like, man, I read the Iliad. My experience goes back to like 800 BC.
Exactly. Like, where do you see yourself in 10 years? Let me tell you where I saw myself 10,000 years ago.
There you go.
Where was I 10,000 years ago? Tell me, please.
10,000 years ago?
Yes.
Like I'd say like you were crossing Europe in the back of a chariot.
Thank you. That's what I always say. Unfortunately, I always get rejected. They don't understand that. Anyways, well, nowadays we're the ones giving job interviews. Correct?
Yes.
Anyways, so
Franco-Prussian War.
Franco-Prussian War. You've had France and under Napoleon III, the nephew of Napoleon, who had a war. Why? There was a reason. Because Europe was getting industrialized. Yeah. Europe was getting industrialized, Germany united, so there was what we call a Thucydides trap.
Yes.
What's a Thucydides trap?
So we've said that name many times on the channel, Thucydides this, Thucydides that.
Yes.
History of the Peloponnesian Wars. He discusses this phenomenon, which has been proven time and time again. It's more or less a law, fundamental law of politics, that as one power rises and another declines, they're going to meet each other eventually, and the declining power refusing to lose its standing and the rising power seeking to gain a new standing will go to war with each other.
So we have an ascending power and a declining power, right?
With Germany ascending.
They clash.
France
Simple,
declining.
Neat, clean.
Franco-Prussian War.
Nice.
Yep.
Therefore, they clashed, and then France lost that war. And it's fundamental for you to understand that before delving into other stuff right now, right? You need to understand that France lost.
And this was a big humiliation for France.
They were an imperial power.
Absolutely. They still had that Napoleonic pride in them.
Germany was a bunch of decrepit states.
Pretty much.
Correct?
Pretty much.
So for them to lose was a shame, an extreme shame. You need to understand.
Totally.
Like Napoleon III lost, and the whole French nation was ashamed of itself. You need to understand they lost l'Alsace et la Lorraine, Alsace-Lorraine.
Yes.
Okay, therefore...
That eastern point of France.
Okay. So it was with Bismarck. And then Bismarck, the Prussian troops marched into Paris. You need to understand what a shame. It's an imperial city, Paris, right? And therefore, now that you know that, you need to understand what caused the First World War. What caused the First World War, first of all, was technological advances.
Yes.
It wasn't the fault of
Industrialization.
anyone. Right? It wasn't the fault of anyone. Let's be honest. Technological advances. And let me be succinct as much as possible with that, okay? As succinct as possible. So you've had technological advances. You've had the Industrial Revolution. right? Who was mastering commerce at the time with the Pax Britannica?
Great Britain.
Great Britain, right?
Yes.
Great Britain was mastering commerce all over the world. Okay? Now, with the Industrial Revolution, you've had what? The machine.
The assembly line, mass production.
Okay.
Yes.
That led to the establishment of railroads.
Yes.
Now, who had coal?
The Germans.
The Germans had
Yes.
coal. They had coal. And with coal, why is it important? Because coal
It's the essence of steam power.
gives you the ability to get those railroads.
To industrialize.
Now, why is it important? Because with the railroads, you have communication and you have commerce.
Over vast distances, yeah.
And with commerce, you get richer. Okay? And money talks, numbers talk, finance, right? Anyways, what the Germans did is they've had an alliance with the Ottoman Empire, okay? And you've had those trade routes with the trains.
Yes, the Silk Road became industrialized.
Thank you very much. So the Silk Road from Asia to Europe
Yep.
has been industrialized thanks to Germany.
Yes.
Okay? So they've had railroads going from Europe to the Silk Road.
Yes.
Until Mecca. Until
Yeah,
Mecca.
pretty much. And so
sorry.
the core of the Islamic world.
Thank
Yes.
you. Which is the door to the Silk Road.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
And Lawrence of Arabia discusses in Seven Pillars of... We'll discuss that book. Seven
Sure,
Pillars of
absolutely.
Wisdom. He discusses that. Anyways, so what was the problem?
So Germany having a monopoly on the commodity of coal had therefore a monopoly on railways, therefore had a monopoly on the industrialization of the Silk Road.
Why? Because the railroad
Yeah.
is faster than the ship.
Yes, it is.
As simple as it is.
Yep.
Like you can do commerce faster with trains than with ships, correct? Logically. Okay.
At least you can do trade faster with the East, because consider, this was before the Suez Canal.
Yes.
The British fleet would have to go around the Southern Cape.
Exactly.
And so Germany really got the shortcut.
The upper hand.
Yeah, by far.
Therefore.
So it's we've discussed the Thucydides trap, rising power, ascending power. There's another dynamic at play here, which it's another law of politics. And there was a German war scientist at the time that came across the same conclusion, which is you'll have a naval power competing with the continental power. It's another dilemma that happens. Germany, having a stronger monopoly over continental trade, was at odds now with Britain, who had their monopoly over...
That's not new. That's not new, right?
Yeah.
The Romans and the Carthaginians.
Remember that, Athens and Sparta. Athens with its navy,
and Sparta.
Sparta with its infantry. Yep.
So that's not new.
These are, like, when we say laws of politics, we mean, like, laws in the same sense as laws of nature.
Exactly.
In the sense that this is something that is abided by, its principle, its truth, it enforces itself, whether you believe in it or not. Whether you believe in it or not.
Exactly. Completely. So it's a very cold analysis. There are no ideologies. We're not telling you he's the bad guy, he's the good guy. Nobody's good, nobody's bad. Everybody's beyond good and evil. Everybody's going after their interest, and who can blame them? Mm-hmm. As simple as it is. As simple as it is. Okay? There is no morality. And that doesn't mean that it's bad or good. Again. Therefore, Germany was taking the upper hand into the world trade.
Yep.
Because they were faster.
They had the monopoly on coal.
They had coal.
They industrialized the Silk Road. They were beating the British to the most lucrative market in the world.
Thank you. And during the Franco-Prussian War, Great Britain financed who?
The French.
The French against the Germans.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, during the First World War, again, they would finance France. They would ally themselves with France against Germany.
Yes.
Now,
it was the Triple Alliance.
Exactly. So forget any ideology, forget who's bad, who's good, that's for babies. We're adults here. Oh, I'm telling you, we're adults here. Okay? So we're trying to understand. Germany was monopolizing the trade routes. Great Britain didn't want to lose its first place. Who can blame them? Everybody wants to be number one. Okay? Simple. Anyways, it's not an ego thing. It's fundamental. It's primitive. It depends on their standing on the world stage. It's very important. Therefore, France was willing to go to war against Germany. Why?
Oh, because they were still bitter about the Alsace-Lorraine.
Humiliated.
Yeah, they were still bitter about the Alsace-Lorraine.
Now, you're following us, correct? Now, I've got your attention, correct? Perfect. Now you stop that video, you go like, you subscribe, and you share that video to your friends, your family, everyone. I want you to subscribe. It's very important. We work a lot on those videos. We need you to subscribe. You have a link where you can support us financially, morally, spiritually. I won't lie to you. We prefer the financial aspect of support. Now, you can like if you don't have money, right? But I would assume that if you watch stuff like that, then you have time and money. Thank you. Anyways, therefore, Great Britain and Germany were at odds because of the trade monopoly. Simple. Therefore, they've had a war, up, killings, unfortunately, of course. And what happens? Germany loses. The Ottoman Empire loses. Germany and its allies, of course. And therefore, you've had for the first time that continental power was on its knees. Germany lost the war. So the United States, for the first time, came out of their isolationism, correct? So before, let us remember, the United States were
isolationist. It's the Monroe Doctrine. They didn't want anything to do with Europe. They just wanted to do their own thing in the Western Hemisphere of the world.
But what happened?
Then the USA started buying British bonds and stuff, supporting the British. Europe became indebted to
Wilson,
America.
19 points.
The 14 points of Wilson. And America has no choice but to get involved. No choice but to get involved. And it had a lot to do also with the personality of Woodrow Wilson. And we'll get to that at a later point.
Of course, with pleasure. So the United States foreign policy was based on the Monroe Doctrine, which means we do our own thing.
For the longest time, yeah.
We do our own thing. We don't want any conflict with those Europeans. They're always getting conflict. We don't want that. We want to live peacefully, blah, blah, blah. And with the Wilson 14 points, they've changed that. You need to understand, it's a big change in the United States foreign policy. So they came on the stage, they've supported the allies, okay, and mainly financially, and of course, let us remember militarily too, but that was at the end. And therefore, the Germans lost. Now, what interests us, now that you know the causes, mainly the economic causes, okay? We have that conference where Europeans and Americans, and basically the world, okay, decided to resettle the world order.
Yeah.
When we say world order, you need to understand what we mean. We mean the order in which the world operates, for commerce, for trade, for relationships. It's like the Westphalia.
Yeah, every time there's a major conflict in the world between great powers, it seems there's always an attempt at some type of progressive universalism. After the 30 Years' War, it was settled by Westphalia. The Napoleonic Wars were settled by the Concert of Europe.
Vienna.
Yes, the Congress of Vienna. Now there's a new attempt at the universalism, the Paris Conference, and the subject of a lot of criticism and imagination for John Maynard Keynes, so much so that he wrote this book, The Economic Consequences of the Peace. And he writes a lot about the personalities that were present at that conference. And for him, a lot of this conference was led by Georges Clemenceau, the French premier, who was more or less the main figure of this conference, yes.
And even France, let us remember, at the time was the main military superpower. Okay, the French army was the biggest, the most efficient, and the most militarily advanced. But it was on decline. It was on decline, and the Germans were on the rise. Therefore, at the conference, you've had main characters. You've had a lot of people from all over the world.
So Keynes focuses on four main characters specifically, each representing their own country. Georges Clemenceau of France, the Premier of France, Woodrow Wilson of America, David Lloyd George of the USA, and Vittorio Emanuele of Italy.
Savoy, the King of Savoy.
The King of Savoy, correct. These are the four main personalities which outlined this conference. And while Clemenceau might have been leading it at the table, the spirit and the air of the age was being more so led by Woodrow Wilson, I would say.
Yes.
The Paris Conference was an attempt to actualize those Wilsonian principles. And
exactly.
Wilson in his own time was something of a superstar. Like
when he arrived in Paris, sorry to cut you.
Go for it.
In the book, as we've read, he was acclaimed as a savior.
Yeah,
he was acclaimed by people as a savior. He didn't understand. You need to understand.
No.
Like, he arrived there, he was like, wait, I'm not the man you think I am.
He's like, I'm just a guy.
Yes.
He's like, I'm just a guy.
And please understand, like, Woodrow Wilson was like a really stoic,
profound man, yeah.
Isolated man. He was very
Secluded.
Secluded, yes. Yeah. He was a scholar.
Yeah.
But he wasn't any type of scholar. He was a scholar in theology. He was almost a Quaker.
Yeah.
He was almost a Quaker. He was really well versed in morality and theology.
Oh,
Okay?
and you can definitely see the influence in the 14 points.
He was very noble. He was very noble as a man.
Yes.
Honestly. Like he had a really, I would say, noble aspects of things. Even to be at sometimes, I would say, naive.
I was going to say that. Yes, you could
Naive.
easily criticize Wilson as being naive and too idealistic. You know what? Like when he arrived in Paris, people were pressing up against his carriage and slamming on the windows because they wanted to take a look at him. He was a star, and he didn't understand it. For him, he was the herald of modernity. He was the guy that was coming across the horizon from the west to heal the wounds of the ancient parent of his civilization. And so he comes there with his bold imagination and with his creativity and his vision for modernization as a prophet, as the herald of modernity is the way that they spoke of him. And underpinning this entire conference was the 14 points. Unfortunately, though, Wilson wasn't able to be that commanding during the conference.
And why? Because
he had a lot of health problems at the time.
Because, yes, and other than that, we can always notice that in American foreign policy is that, let's be honest, Let's be honest. They're not well versed in European affairs, all of them, throughout all times. Like you can see that the major experts in European politics are themselves originally Europeans. The master of geopolitics of our time, the biggest witness of the 20th century. You can check
our video out on him, Henry Kissinger.
And of course, we will delve into each one of his books. He's such an important character and such an important witness of the 20th century that we cannot but delve into each one of his books. He even has a book called World Order. We'll delve into it. Anyways, so they're all of those people, those policymakers.
Yes, the American intelligentsia was formed of European migrants.
Of the Cold War.
Yes.
They're all European immigrants. Because why? Because they understand the confrontational level of Europe. They understand it deeply. It's like
they know what it's like to live with the USSR at your border.
Even policymakers from the US to the Middle East, they're originally
from the Middle East.
They're Middle Easterns.
Yeah,
you see. So that's beautiful about America is that they use everybody, even immigrants, right? They use immigrants at their strength.
Yeah, totally.
You see. So let's be honest. Like Nixon was a farmer. He was the son of a farmer.
Yep.
Nixon couldn't be that versed
in global affairs
if he didn't have Kissinger, who was a pure genius. Regardless of the controversies around him, regardless, he was a pure genius. Master chess player, pure genius. Like Kissinger had a culture that was encyclopedic, if I might say.
A philosophical superpower.
Exactly.
Like even at a young age.
Like we've delved into his book, The Meaning of History.
As much as we could.
It's as deep as deepness can go. I won't lie to you.
It's an abyss of philosophy.
Exactly. And therefore, did you know when I shoot those videos, I feel like a spirit takes over my body.
Yeah, I feel animated.
No, I feel a spirit takes over. It's not me talking. Honestly, I don't know how to explain. Anyways, therefore, those policymakers from the US who were experts are originally immigrants. Anyways.
But America didn't quite have that yet at this time. Didn't quite have that European influx of people. And so because of Wilson's poor health, I think he contracted some type of disease while he was on the ship. And he was already in poor health to begin with. He couldn't quite assert himself as much as he would have liked to. That great and imaginary mind, it didn't exert itself as it should have at that conference. And so his demands for, what was it, the predecessor of the United Nations, the League of Nations, didn't quite go through.
Like, you know, Wilson was more about doing the right thing, which is noble.
And when we say right, we don't mean like, because we talk about interests and morality a lot here. Like Wilson, when we say right, we mean in fact morally right.
Morally.
In the case of Wilson.
Which is honestly, let's be completely honest, it was naive. It was naive knowing European politics deeply. I'll tell you why. Europe was going out of Bismarckian politics. Like, you know what's Bismarckian politics? Like Otto von Bismarck used to do politics with blood and iron. Okay? Like you need to understand Europe was deeply embedded into this Bismarckian politics. Otto von Bismarck united those principalities. Yeah. He used to deal with politics, as he would say, with blood and iron. Okay? There was no room for diplomacy. Blood and iron, up it. Arms, weapons, up and out. We kill, up. That was the way, unfortunately. And Clemenceau, the French president at the time, understood that.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes, that's the reason why Clemenceau was able to be the big voice of that conference. Even though Wilson captured, let's say, the imagination of the public and the spirit of his age, Clemenceau was just more forceful. Why? Because he had a greater understanding of European affairs. He was less naive, therefore, than Wilson. And also because, being the Frenchman that he was, he had that bitterness and he had that sense of vengeance that he wanted to exact against the German. And in fact, he had some very, let's say, unkind words for the German mind and for the German mentality. Whereas Wilson would have approached that conference with a type of ideological idealism, Clemenceau approached that conference in a very crude sense.
He wanted to impose a diktat.
Exactly, exactly. For him, this is Clemenceau speaking, this is Keynes quoted Clemenceau. For him, the Germans were not a people, at least at that time, the Bismarckian Germans, those were not a people that you could negotiate and do diplomacy with.
You need to command.
You need to command them and instruct them.
We're just quoting, no?
Yeah.
So you need to command them the terms. You cannot negotiate.
And we saw this with the general, the celebrated general Ferdinand Foch, the celebrated artillery commander who was hailed as one of the heroes of the First World War. There were comparisons between him and Napoleon, even though Ferdinand Foch would be criticized for having methods that would induce drastic losses on his side, let's say the least. Ferdinand Foch did a very symbolic and very crude gesture at the conference where he just walked into the carriage, stated his terms, and left.
So that wasn't the Versailles Conference. It was like the military, we would say, settlement.
Yes, okay.
He just imposed his terms on the German generals, and he just
left.
He just gave them the information, like, we're going to do that, ciao, ciao, and he left. Okay? That left them astonished.
Yep.
Okay? Because the General Foch was the hero of the First War. Him and one who would become a very controversial character, the
Maréchal Pétain.
Maréchal Pétain, who would be very controversial, very extremely controversial after that. Anyways, so therefore you need to understand the mind. Like, it was, Europeans were very bittered against each other.
Yeah.
The French wanted truly to put the Germans on their knees.
And it's interesting. It represented an entire change in the spirit of Europeans, because people are actually excited for this war. Because up until that point, there was a belief in Europe that militarism is good and that war is good for nation building, and it's good for the economy, it's good for the economic stimulus. But this war was more devastating than anybody could have ever imagined.
Let us remember, that's the first mechanized war, right? Like,
yeah.
You do not have that, even during the Franco-Prussian War, you've had that cavalier, you've had that...
the cavalry.
The cavalry, which represented, you could even say... Let us remember that Napoleon's cavalry used to get on the horseback with no saddle to do like the heroes of the Iliad. just so you know. So you've had that sense of heroism.
Yeah.
But there is no heroism in the mud, in a trench, unfortunately.
There's
all of that culture of that painting of the soldier and death.
Yes, the surrealism. The greater the distance between you and your adversary, the less honor there is. The further you're able to be from your adversary and still be able to inflict a casualty, the less honorable the warfare becomes. And we can see it nowadays, the horror, the disgusting horror that is drone warfare. How dishonorable and cowardly it is. And what a horror of modernity it is.
Yeah, with drones nowadays.
Exactly.
And all of that, right? It's
yes.
just a guy in his room who's inflicting...
With a video game controller, with a video...
Exactly, right? There is no more glory in war. Not that there has been glory in war, right? What is the glory into taking somebody else's life, right? But still there was that sense of, I would say, bravery. But anyways, so we can see how European politics is shifting.
Yeah.
So you have the American coming with his morality. Everybody's like...
they never heard it before in history.
Where does he come from?
What Keynes said is never before has a philosopher had such weapons with which he could strangle the princes of the world. It was so novel. Nobody ever heard stuff like this before.
So the Americans came with their morality. The Europeans were like, where does he come from? Like, he doesn't understand how we deal with stuff here. And Keynes would even say that the French wanted to impose what he calls a Carthaginian peace.
Yes,
what is a Carthaginian peace? What does it refer to?
It refers to the sacking of Carthage?
During the Punic Wars,
exactly.
There was the sacking of Carthage.
Yeah.
The Romans obliterated, destroyed, destructed Carthage with no pity, with no remorse, on their knees.
Destruction. Okay? Utter and absolute destruction.
Exactly. So there was a reference to those wars, and the French wanted to impose that on the hordes of Huns. That's how they used to refer to them. Referring to Attila the Hun, they used to refer to the Germans as the Attila the Hun. Okay?
In reference to their barbarism and their cruelty.
Yes, they used to call them les Boches.
Les Boches.
Les Boches, yes. So, which was, and clearly it was a misconception, right? It was a misconception, misinformation about, because let us be honest, right? European people are kind of the same, right? All of them, culturally, religiously, intellectually. It's just they don't eat the same food, okay? Let's be honest, huh? So, unfortunately, truly, there has been a lot of death, a lot of killings, a lot of destruction, a lot of toil.
More than anyone anticipated. That's the thing. More than anyone. They went into this war with the belief that it will only last a couple months.
Like, please understand, the generals who instigated that war didn't understand what was happening. Like, you need to understand, they were faced with cavalry, with the invention of the tank. The British invented the tank, and they were saying, "Oh, unleash the cavalry." They were using horses against tanks. You need to understand how they weren't up to date with the technological advances. They were charging horses against tanks, just so you understand. Like, those were old men who didn't understand that the world was shifting into mechanized warfare, okay? And if they knew, they wouldn't have dared to go to war. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
I'm telling you. Because nowadays, man, there's that movie about those submarines, that nuclear submarine.
Oh, jeez, I think
with Denzel Washington.
I know what you're talking about.
What's
and
that
they
movie?
start talking about von Clausewitz in the movie and stuff like that. Oh, jeez, I forget.
I forgot.
Code Red, Clear and Red October.
I forgot, man. Honestly.
Something like that.
I forgot. But you know what he says? He says, like, right? It's a movie in a submarine. Leave in the comments, please, if you remember that movie's name, Denzel Washington. And they talk about that, you know, you're a nuclear submarine, right? And he says that,
like, you're in a tin can under the sea that can destroy the world.
You know, the ability of the world to win a war is not to go to war.
Yeah.
Like, you win a war by not going to war. That's why we really like to talk about Henry Kissinger, because we truly think that nowadays, honestly, diplomacy is the only way. It's the only way.
Yeah.
You cannot go to war with nuclear weapons. It's suicidal for all of us. Therefore, diplomacy is the most revered
Profession, discipline, yes.
Exactly. Therefore, so Clemenceau wanted to put Germany on their knees, and the British wanted to do business. Honestly. Let's be honest. The British wanted to do business.
They wanted to maintain as much of their slipping power as they could.
Of course. But still, the British understood the French, right? Like, Lord George was Welsh. He wasn't really liked by the establishment because he was Welsh. And Lloyd George understood the French animosity towards the British, and he had a hard time explaining Wilson. Wilson didn't quite understand. He was like, "We need to do the right thing." And Lloyd George was like, "Yeah, but you need to understand. Listen, those guys have been fighting for centuries now.
Yeah.
Okay."
You know what Clemenceau said? Clemenceau said that civil infighting within Europe was just a fact of nature. He said, like, it's never going to go away.
Civil infighting. I like that. You know, like, it was called the Civil War.
That's what Clemenceau said exactly. Like, civil war within Europe.
It's a European civil war.
Yeah.
Like, they consider themselves as being one nation. It's very interesting to bear in mind, right?
Yes.
Why? You know why they say that?
Catholicism? Christianity?
Not just that. That's culturally, right? But because Europe, economically, is completely and utterly dependent of each other. Every single country in Europe is completely and utterly dependent of each other. You need to understand, like, the coal comes from Germany, the production comes from another country, the services from another country. They're intertwined. Europe cannot function if they're not in peace. Like, Europe as a continent.
Modern Europe, industrial Europe.
Yes, they cannot function if they're not at peace with each other. Because if one goes to war with the other, the whole system, the whole statute code, the whole apparatus is doomed.
Yes.
Therefore, it's like one state that is supposed to function properly, but that is separated by different cultural aspect of things. And that is unfortunate because, honestly, as I said, other than the food, like, what differentiates Europeans, honestly? Language. But that's okay, right? We can deal with that, no? Anyways, therefore, at the conference, as we've said, Wilson was a bit naive, honestly. Clemenceau was harsh. He was hard.
Yep.
Lloyd George was trying to explain Clemenceau because, you know, they're Anglo-Saxons. Like, listen, man, I'm going to tell you how it works here. It's true.
Yeah.
And the Germans were in front of the facts. in front of the facts, unfortunately.
Yes.
So they've established a system of repayment.
Yes, which was kind of against Keynes's idealism and against also the idealism of Wilson as well. Part of the 14 points, Keynes's main critique of that conference was that we should be focusing on economic recovery. The purpose of that conference should be the reconstruction of Europe. But instead, so much of the energy of that day was turned towards vendettas and vengeance and animosity.
So let me even quote the exact words of Keynes. We have not seen the magnanimity of the victor towards the winner. That antique and incensed, glorified virtue, right? When you win, you go to the loser, you
shake his hand.
You shake his hand, you tell him, good game, now let us rebuild together.
Yes.
That was the statu quo.
Yes. In that sense, revenge is pathetic. Revenge is pathetic in that sense, What Keynes was saying was also like, only if we establish an equitable and transparent and integrative economic model can Europe ever recover.
Revenge is unproductive because after a generation or two...
there will be another vendetta.
And as we've seen, right?
Yes.
As we've seen, more destruction, more hate, more toil.
Yep.
Unfortunately, because after a generation or two, you will have new energies that will be able to take revenge. And it's vendetta against vendetta. It never ends.
Yeah.
So the winner always needs to go to the loser and tell him, listen, man, good game. I've won, you lost. But let us rebuild together on new basis of peace. Mm-hmm. Of peace, of harmony. That's the word, harmony. Anyways, so Keynes resigned.
Yeah, he got very stressed out. Like, his health deteriorated super bad during this conference. He couldn't take it anymore because he felt like the Wilsonian points, the Wilsonian doctrine, had been completely violated. That what the conference set out to do had not yet been achieved. Rather than promote free trade and economic recovery, they instead established reparations and tariffs. Rather than promote free trade, it promoted quite the opposite. Prior to the First World War, globalism was in full swing, at more or less the level that it is today, where there was a lot of trade and exchange between empires and nations. What the First World War did was it quite literally sunk globalism, and instead you had the breakup of those nations into smaller, more, how should I say, unitary and isolated entities. And so I could even attribute that as being one of the causes of the Great Depression, the decline of commerce and free trade.
Of course.
That down the line resulted in the Great Depression.
Of course. Because as we've already discussed, Europe is completely and utterly intertwined with each other. You cannot just have one country that decides to go economically
berserk,
autonomous.
Yeah.
Berserk, yes. Because they're intertwined. They cannot operate. Rome, the empire, right? Mm-hmm. You've had the East. Egypt was the supply of grains for the whole empire, okay? Trade was fundamental for the well functioning of the empire. You cannot just say, okay, now we're going to isolate ourselves from the world. It will not work. It will not work. That's fugazi. Like when you hear people telling you, okay, we're going to go from that trade accord, we're going to just isolate ourselves from the world. Fugazi. Mm-hmm. Populism for nothing.
Yeah.
Populism for nothing. It's true. Because you will starve. That's the facts. You will starve. Okay, unfortunately. So you need to cooperate with each other, and it's okay, it's easy. Honestly, it's not always easy, but you can do it. You say you can do it.
Hence the virtue of diplomacy.
Of course.
Hence the value of diplomacy.
Two men in a room can achieve a lot for people.
And that's what politics is ultimately. It's a bunch of guys in a room seeing if they get along.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely. That's why you need to have open-minded people who can put themselves in the shoes of the other, who can understand deeply the interests of the other, and therefore, bring peace and harmony. As simple as it is. Anyways, so Europe is completely economically intertwined. One country cannot operate without the other. Okay? That's a fact.
The First World War, or I should say the Paris Conference, rather than enforce this fact, kind of did away with it altogether. And this would result in the eventual depression and just the isolation of all those small states.
So what they wanted to do basically was make Germany pay a sum that was astronomical.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
And Keynes was against it because he said that will bring another war.
Yes.
As we know, he was right.
Yes.
He was right. Okay? So
hence the term Carthaginian peace, like where a treaty is signed such that the losing side is just beaten into
But you will
submission.
annihilate the losing side.
Yeah.
Okay? And that will only bring resistance from the losing side, right? Like when you corner an animal, let's use
It's when it becomes its most desperate.
Okay,
When it
exactly.
becomes its most desperate.
Exactly. Therefore, Keynes wanted to stop another war. Unfortunately, he didn't succeed, right?
Yeah.
They didn't listen to him, unfortunately.
Everything that Keynes said more or less turned out to be good. He had a lot of animosity with the American delegation there. And every time the American delegation
why?
overruled him, it's the motherland and the child? Is that the
No.
kind of analogy you want to make?
No, it's deeper. It's not that deep, honestly. I'll tell you.
Okay.
Because Wilson, I'll tell you, very simple. Like, the American delegation was not made mostly of technocrats, but of businessmen. And Keynes discusses that. Like, the American delegation was surrounded
True.
by
yes.
one man who understood European politics and affairs, and even world affairs, Colonel House, who wasn't a colonel, but they used to call him Colonel. Colonel House was really deeply embedded. He was the Kissinger of his time, you could say.
Yeah.
And but unfortunately, Wilson used to listen more to businessmen, people who just wanted to trade. It's okay to trade. It's great to trade. It creates riches. It creates prosperity. It's great. But you cannot trade if you don't understand the political aspect of things. You cannot. Okay? Therefore, he was very badly informed. Like, let us be completely honest. We were there at the conference. We were sitting like next to Clemenceau. Okay? At that conference, Wilson was mocked. He was mocked because he was too naive, because he was surrounded by businessmen who just wanted to do business. Instead of listening to Colonel House, okay, he listened to businessmen mostly, at the despair of Keynes.
Yep.
At the despair of Keynes.
Who would later on go to say, ha, I told you so. Pretty much.
That's the biggest I told you so ever.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, haha, war again. And Keynes wasn't the only one that saw it coming. Ferdinand Foch, actually, who was concerned that the treaty wasn't harsh enough. By the way, the main French objective there was to punish Germany and take revenge for what happened with the Alsace-Lorraine. And that was the big French motivation right
And
there.
even to take their coal mines. They wanted to take the coal mines. The coal was very important, that region called Rhenania, La Rhénanie.
Oh, yeah. The subsequent occupation of the Rhineland.
Exactly.
Yes.
So that was because of the coal.
Yes, the occupation of the German
They
industrial
needed the
center
coal.
for 15 years, yes.
They needed the coal. And because, as we've said, it was the Industrial Revolution, and the coal was fundamental.
Was the prime commodity.
It was a vital interest for Europe. Okay? And Germany became, you need to understand, at that time, the world was understanding, even at Napoleon's time, what did Napoleon say about China?
Oh, yeah. He points at his map and says, there lies a sleeping giant, and let it sleep, for when it wakes, the world will tremble.
Quand la Chine se réveillera, le monde tremblera. When China will wake up, the world will
shake.
tremble.
Yeah.
And not just that, Napoleon wanted to create a power that would be able to compete even with the United States, industrial power. Well, there wasn't industry at the time, but like he saw it coming.
Yeah.
And therefore, that was the objective, we could say, of getting a continental European power that would be able, even today, right? The European Union. What's the European Union?
Yeah.
It's a way to compete with China and the United States. Let's say it as it is.
Literally.
Right? Let's be completely honest. They want to compete. Europeans want to compete with the United States, with China, and with the bigger powers. Simple. Therefore, for example, people saying we need to get out of the European Union. Complete
Not so
misunderstanding.
wise. It's not that wise.
Complete misunderstanding of how the economic aspects of Europe work. Complete misunderstanding. Anyways.
So yeah, France occupies the industrial center of Germany for like 15 years.
Yes.
And consider the Treaty of Versailles relative to the other treaties at the time. In fact, it was not that harsh. The Treaty of Trianon, for example, completely destroyed Austria-Hungary. They lost like 2/3 of their territory and like 80% of their population. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, yeah, which again saw Russia secede from the war, took a lot of their industrial heartland as well. And like on paper, the Treaty of Versailles was not that harsh, but it was the symbolism of it that really offended the Germans. Yeah. It was a diktat. And the Germans, remember, were a people with a lot of pride. There's that very famous anecdote of Admiral Alfred von Reuter, when the Allies commanded the Germans to yield their navy. What did they do? They sank their own navy. Their own navy. their prize warship. Consider the pride of their fleet, their prized possessions, their navy, which was at the point of being able to not quite outdo the British, but be so threatening and intimidating that it pressured the British. They sank those ships rather than return them.
But we need to understand that Germany was going to be the first industrial superpower of the planet.
Yeah, they were on their way.
Even above the United States, just so you know at the time how serious it was. Okay, like Germany was becoming the number one industrial superpower of the planet. Just so you know. Okay, it's crazy to think about it nowadays, but voila. Anyways, so Keynes resigned.
Yep.
Okay. And Keynes told them that, listen, guys, if you want to make a real and serious treaty, call me back. But if you want to do it, we need to focus on some points. First of all, we need to do a constructive peace. A peace that will not just put people on their knees, but will tell people, listen, man, chill. You want to live? I want to live too.
The world order has space for everyone.
Yes. We need a balance of powers. Thank you very much. We need a balance of powers. In Europe, it only works like that. You need a balance of powers and cooperation for trade. That's how it works. Okay? They didn't listen to him, unfortunately, you see. And that caused the Second World War. Therefore, Keynes would go on and become an expert of economics. People would listen to him after the Second World War.
Yes.
And they would call him...
And be like, Maynard, John, my boy, you were right. Let's do it your way this time.
Yes, let's do it your way. So who did they call for the Bretton Woods Accords? Now we're going to step 2. So we did the causes, we did the Versailles Treaty, we did his opposition.
Keynes critique.
Now we're going to the last step, Bretton Woods.
Yes.
Bretton Woods, you need to understand, is the basis, the foundation of the financial and economical system, even geopolitical system you live in today.
Even though it's obsolete, its principles and what it established has been a force in the world.
Exactly. So it's the basis of the IMF, International
Monetary Fund, the IMBD, the International Bank of Development, which is today the World Bank.
So we need to talk about that, and we need to go straight to Nixon afterwards.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So therefore, we have the Bretton Woods Accords. The Bretton Woods Accord, to be quick, succinct, and precise, but concise. The Bretton Woods Accords was nations assembling to a city called Bretton Woods in the United States.
In New Hampshire, yes.
Thank you. Therefore, they've established a new order.
Yes, one based on free trade. And in order to promote the free trade, the key ingredient of this accord was
a global
a fixed exchange rate.
Fixed
exchange rate. All currencies now, if you wanted to exchange internationally,
needed to be pegged.
Needed to be pegged to the US, or not quite pegged, but would have to be exchanged to the US dollar. Okay. And all other currencies would have to be on parity within 1%.
Perfect.
Within the US dollar.
Perfect.
So very strict conditions, and all participating nations had a mutual responsibility to uphold this. They could petition the IMF if they wanted to, and then at that point, all the other nations would have to maintain that obligation. But ultimately, what underpinned this whole agreement was that the US dollar, while the whole world was pegged to the US dollar itself would be backed by gold.
Okay, perfect. So you had the centralization of currency, which was gold. But everybody was centralized to the dollars.
Yep.
But the dollar was centralized to gold.
Yep.
So there was an allegiance to the US dollar, but the US dollar had an allegiance to gold.
And there's a term for this. The Triffin dilemma.
The Triffin dilemma.
Yes.
Okay. The Triffin dilemma. Let's get into that.
Yes. So these 2 points and these 2 aspirations are at odds with each other. The desire for a currency to be strong,
yes,
and the desire for a currency to be a global currency.
Okay.
These desires are at odds with each other. They're not quite compatible.
Why?
Right, because if you want your currency to be strong, then the amount of currency you have must not exceed the amount of gold you have.
But how can you stop your expansion?
By running
what if your expansion is faster
than your gold extraction?
What do you do? We'll get to Nixon. We'll get to Nixon.
Yes,
wait, give me a second. Oh, listen, man, I can stay here for days now. Okay, listen, wait. Okay.
So let me just finish the Triffin dilemma. So that's the case with gold. Like, you don't want your currency exceeding the amount of gold you have. But if you want to be a global currency, then you want to have as much of it available as possible. And so the finiteness the finiteness of the aspiration for a strong currency and the infiniteness of the aspiration for a global currency are no longer aligned with each other. And eventually these forces pull each other apart until we get to, let's say, the 70s, the era of Nixon.
Wait, just a second.
Okay.
First of all, Bretton Woods. So, as we've said,
Yes.
nations had to have, because you need to understand there was the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe. So
Yes.
So let's get fastly into that. So basically, the Marshall Plan, they gave money to Great Britain. Great Britain was the agent, if you will, of the United States in Europe. Okay, remember Winston Churchill used to say, if we have to choose between the continent and the open sea, we will choose the open sea. Anyways, therefore, and we've seen that with the Brexit, right?
Yeah.
So Great Britain was the agent of the United States in Europe. So the United States used to give money to their little child. You give that to your friends and you give it to them if they need help. Yes, they used to take the money and they used to give it to the countries in Europe to rebuild them. Okay? Marshall Plan. Deal? You have the Marshall Plan. No, that was the First World War. Then the Second World War, it was more direct funding from the US, Marshall Plans, etc. So you've had dollars all over Europe. You've had it opened a market. It opened up a market. The European who used to wear a pantalon now wears a jeans,
yeah.
a Levi's jeans, correct? You have Pepsi, you have Coca-Cola, all those companies in Europe, Hollywood. So it was the opening of a market. Nice. For the US, nice. Good job. But anyways, therefore, all the currencies, if you will, used to have a deeply rooted trust in the dollar because the dollar was the foundation of their
entire system.
Rebuilding.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
Perfect. Therefore, afterwards, you have the Bretton Woods Accords that tell you that, okay, our currency's allegiance is to gold. But the US, no, I'm sorry, our allegiance is to the US dollar, and the US dollar's allegiance is to gold. But what did Charles de Gaulle do when he saw that system couldn't work?
Oh, yeah.
What did he do?
There was some loophole that he exploited, yeah.
Because he saw, he said, okay, you know what? Because Charles de Gaulle understood that it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. Like, you're expanding so fast, there isn't gold enough. So he said, you know what, guys? I'm out. It's even Charles de Gaulle going out of NATO. He even went out of NATO, right?
Yes.
Charles de Gaulle went out of NATO, and Charles de Gaulle was somebody who wanted to really preserve that independence of France. So he said, you know what, guys? I'm out. I'll cash out. Just take that's the
Take
US.
my francs and give me some gold.
Yeah, give me some gold. I'm out. You're telling me that your money is valued on gold? Give me the gold then.
I'd prefer the gold, yeah.
He took the gold.
Yeah.
And he was right. Why was he right? Because what happened afterwards with Nixon?
Yeah. Vietnam War, it got so costly, they had to print so much money.
Yes.
And the US dollar just became completely devalued.
Destandardization.
Yeah.
Correct?
Destandardization.
So what it meant was that now the US dollar, okay, was not
backed by something concrete.
Backed by gold. Now it was backed, and nowadays it is backed on military force.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. We're not telling you it's bad or good. We're just telling you a fact. It's backed by military force.
It's like agree or else.
No, it's what it is. And again, we're not telling you it's good or bad. But let us be completely honest. Like, the US touch into European affairs made it more smooth. Let's be completely honest. Like, those guys.
That's right. They used to be fighting each other, like what Clemenceau said. Civil war in Europe is a fact of life, is a fact of nature. We haven't had a major conflict in Europe.
60 years,
yeah,
right?
With the exception of the recent events.
Of course, unfortunately. But let us be completely honest. Maybe he was naive, Wilson. Mm-hmm. Maybe. But thank God.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you haven't had a war, a major conflict until nowadays, unfortunately, in Europe for that time.
Mm-hmm.
So it was more, like, you can see it, right? For example, in France, between France and Germany, even their military is deeply embedded to each other. They have a lot of common military exercises. The French rifle, the Rafale, has been switched up with the HK of the Germans. Their munitions are the same. So even if they wanted to go to war with each other, like, you cannot go to war with them because
your arms are the same. You supply each other your arms.
You supply each other, which is good. Yeah. Thank God.
Yes.
But anyways.
Yes.
But anyways. So we can say that Wilson's naivete was in the right place.
Sometimes the best realists are idealists, you know?
I like that. I'll have to take notes.
And, yeah, thank God he was naive.
Yes.
And this is even the impetus behind the European Union. I forget the name of the guy, Monnet.
Jean Monnet.
Jean Monnet said, economic interdependence is going to be what saves Europe. Is what's going to prevent the outbreak of another great war in
Because
Europe.
look, if I'm financially dependent on you,
Yeah.
and you're financially dependent on me, we have no choice but to
Get
get
along.
along,
Yeah.
which is great, because we can always find compromise. We can always find compromise. That's the basis of diplomacy. Remember, guys, all of us once, doesn't matter which culture, which country we were in, we're all in the Garden of Eden. All of us. We're in that harmonious place. We all come from the same essence. We all come from the same unity. All of us. So it's always better, instead of going to war again, to find compromise, to make a deal. To make a deal. Okay? Everybody has the same objectives. Everybody has the same goals. To be prosper, to have a nice family, beautiful babies, nice car maybe.
Lots of babies.
Nice. I hope we'll have many of you, man. Honestly.
Would be nice.
Nice. Leave a comment if you'd like to make more of that. So therefore, we came to the Nixon. So Nixon destandardized the US dollar. So now it isn't backed by anything.
Regretfully, he had to. The Vietnam War ended up being what it was. And it became like way too expensive to fund conventionally.
And it is to be continued, because we're living in it, huh? We're seeing
Yes,
the
and as the Bretton Woods system went out of date, what emerged was the Jamaican system.
Yes.
Yes.
But tell us a bit about that global currency that Keynes wanted to
The
implement.
Bancor, yes.
The Bancor.
The Bancor was his idea to make like a global, because
Really?
you make a global currency.
And
or at
what
least-
can excuse me, what can we see developing itself alone today?
Exactly.
Because people didn't listen to Keynes. What can we see developing itself just like by
he
nature?
kind of predicted cryptocurrency.
Right?
He predicted cryptocurrency.
Very interesting,
He
right?
predicted the need and the necessity for something which was decentralized but like internationally exchangeable, which is interesting. And what's interesting about the Bitcoin is it's backed by
Trust, blockchain.
by the blockchain, yes,
Nice, I
by
see.
trust.
So we can today see that Keynes' idea of a world currency
It's kind of come to fruition.
it's coming. It's in the process.
It's kind of
right?
come to fruition.
It's very interesting.
You know, those Europeans at that Paris conference might have mocked Keynes for his, let's say, his affinity for those Wilsonian points, and they might have shoot him off. But everything he kind of said, or kind of forewarned about, turned out to be true to some extent or another. Yes, Bretton Woods did go out of style by 1971, but nevertheless, we could say that Keynes, in consideration of his breadth of knowledge and his expansive, as well as just the character himself, his personality, more or less became the herald of the new world, the herald of the economic age, even if neoliberalism would take the reins of the new world in the 90s and so on. More or less, John Maynard Keynes was that man that sculpted that vision, was the man who conceived the world order first in his mind and his soul, and then brought it to the conference rooms of Europe, where it took hold of our institutions and created a peace like never before.
And honestly, man, to that I would say, voila.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Voilà qui je suis. Mais voilà même ici.
That's my mom.
Mes années c'est fini. C'est mes gosses, c'est mon cri. Mais voilà tant pis.